question. Okay. Well, Happy New Year to you all. How is 2022 going? On a roll so far? Yeah. Awesome. Good for me. I feel like I was tiptoeing into 2022 after the last couple of years, but my hopes are high. Let's see here. I'm just checking to make sure I didn't have any other questions to cover today. So David, why don't we start with your question that you emailed in, and then we can chat a bit about that and then go from there. So David's question for those on the call or listening to the recording was about LLC ownership, right? So this has to do with real estate. And keep in mind, I practiced real estate law for years. I'm obviously not licensed in Arkansas, but the general overview when it comes to owning real estate within an LLC, especially in the context of a marital community, right? So husband, wife, or partnership community, is it partly depends. So for example, Washington,
Heather,
yeah.
Heather, I missed something you said there, but I'm in Missouri, not Arkansas.
Oh, okay, Missouri. So do you know if Missouri is a community property state?
No, it's not.
It's not. Okay. Yeah, there's only 11 that are. So with it not being a community property state, the questions that you would want to consider, and this, for anybody, really real estate has some very similar parallels to business. The questions are, one, what are your goals? And two, what liability are you creating or do you have within a certain scenario? So in David's case, he's wanting to buy a piece of property from a family member, but it's going to be used by numerous family members, correct? And then probably friends of family, etc. Secondary property, right? Right, not your principal home. So in that instance, my recommendation is to hold that type of property within an LLC. And reason being is because even though it's family, there still is some liability. So let's pretend, for example, that a family member invites a good friend or invites a good friend with children, or, any number of circumstances that could happen where a third party ends up being involved and has an accident or gets injured, or, some wonky thing happens. And we don't like to, think in advance about these things, but they do happen. And so the, real estate, and especially, and let me ask you a question, David, is there any chance you guys would like Airbnb it or ever do something like that where third parties who are not directly connected to your family might be staying there or paying a little rent to help you cover costs?
It would only be just friends of the family. So that would be basically third party with it, occasionally. So the agreement is we're getting it at a huge discount because the father-in-law is just tired of life, doesn't want to wait till he dies to pass it on, which would be better because then we could get step-up basis. But he's selling it for 80, it's worth 120. I'm just going to have to take the tax hit eventually when I sell it. But it is a family type heirloom thing. So, the agreement, was that, we would offer it to the same family to go and book a weekend here or there, but this time they have to pay, $40 to us. If they have a family friend, like their IP attorney maybe says, I want to go to Branson, Missouri, right? Well, it's going to cost Heather $70 to go there, but family's 40 and family friends. Right now, not any Airbnb. It's more keeping in the family for a long time.
Got it. Okay. Will, and the truth is, like you mentioned, setting up an LLC is not that expensive. And the thing that it does do is for any liability, and welcome to Carrie and Colin and Glenn and Marilyn, I want to acknowledge others on the call, is it does house your liability within that structure, right? Within that entity, so that if at any time there were any liability related to the property, or let's say you even wanted to change the nature of the use of the property, you're much more able to do that and not worry so much about any risk associated with it. When it comes to decision making within an LLC, because you had a follow-up question about, husband, wife LLCs, and this is important for anybody on the call, even from a business perspective, because in a marital or in a community property state, and I realize, David, yours is not, but in a community property state, essentially a spouse is part owner of any business like LLC that their spouse sets up, whether they're on the records or not, right? So I'm in Washington, which is a community property state, and that means that my husband has half interest in anything that I create, any assets that I create during the marriage, right? So it is something to be very aware of. There are ways that people try to deal with that in the context of, business decisions, et cetera. But generally speaking, if you've got an LLC, and plenty of people do this voluntarily, set up a business and include their spouse within, let's, say the LLC model. Really, what you have to decide, and your question was to management, do you do, manager managed or member managed, right? And we've talked about manager managed versus member managed before on these calls. And basically the difference is with a manager, you're selecting often, it can be a professional organization or individual, even outside of the LLC, to come in and manage it. Can also be somebody designated as, one of the members of the LLC can be designated as the manager. If you don't make that designation across the board, most states, the fallback is going to be that it's member managed, which means the members are all able to manage it, amongst themselves. For a two-person LLC, that's generally not too cumbersome, but you have to be really clear on, do we both want to be managing this? And is it a 50-50? Is it some people will often design a 49-51 type of scenario so that there's always a tiebreaker that, all of the strategy behind that, often takes quite a bit of thought into, the nature of your relationship, how you want to allocate decision making, whether you work really well as a team around those types of decisions and 50-50 is fine, or whether you really need a tiebreaker. Some people, but having the 59-41 type of setup really means that there has to be trust at the beginning. For somebody to give up that additional, percentage to the other person means that they're in the position of having to rely on that default clause, which is going to give the other person, priority when it comes to decision making. The other thing is you often have members who are not even interested in running the LLC. They might be a member for other reasons. Maybe they invested, maybe they contributed something, but they're not actually interested in running and being involved in day-to-day management. And so you can have members that are there in ownership, but not there essentially in management, right? So there are different ways that you can set that up. So David, if you're thinking we both want to be members, my wife maybe is not interested in being involved in all of the day-to-day management, right? You could be designated the manager, or she could be designated and, an interest holder, an owner, but not be involved in any of the management. So there are a variety of ways that you can set these things up. And a lot of it has to do with the relationship involved. I've worked with people who are husband-wife teams where 50-50 is going to work great. They've worked well for years together. They've made other business decisions together in their life. They're not concerned about, because the risk of a 50-50, right, is that you get to a loggerhead over something and you can't decide, and you have equal ownership and equal, management duties. And so the other way that people can sometimes get around that is have 49 and 49% ownership, and then they'll designate a third party with 2% ownership that is the tiebreaker, if you will. So sometimes that works where people want to maintain, equality within the primary membership roles, but they need a tiebreaker. So anyways, this is a long-winded way of saying there's a variety of ways to approach it. It often depends on the individuals involved and their preferences and their ability to work together.
And so the manager managed can be assigned, you can assign anybody to that. And the concept was always, I think, in a lawsuit, that if if I'm a member and they sue me, they take my interest. Well, we still have a manager who's in charge, who can run the company, and not distribute funds. And so the lawsuit becomes, useless, because if you're the manager as a member managed, they now took your ownership membership interest. Now they can actually manage it and sell the place off, take all the money and pay off the lawsuit. So that's why I like that, the manager managed aspect to it.
Yeah, there is. Right. There is that piece for most. And again, I don't practice in Missouri. So we could get an answer from somebody who practices there. Generally speaking, when a creditor becomes involved in an LLC scenario, they're not actually, they literally take a creditor position. They do not take a management position over the company. Right. So they stand in the place of somebody who has equity, right? But they do not gain control over the business. Their position is strictly monetary, strictly as a creditor. So for most, although, like I said, I don't practice in all 50 states, obviously, most state laws are fairly protective around that, where it might be even written into their LLC laws that creditors are not entitled to management. And you can also draft clauses into your operating agreement that state as much, right? So that it's really not, the goal is clearly across the board for businesses and for, in a real estate scenario, that creditors do not take over the ability to manage the business, that they are basically there with a creditor position where they're owed money. And to the extent something gets liquidated, they're first in line.
Okay, yeah, and that was kind of another question I had too, is the operating agreement side. This is basically a rental. It's not a first home. It's more like a rental. Don't you need an operating agreement that kind of states that that's what's taking place? I know it's a default as a partnership. That makes it a rental. We don't do an S corp, which is additional filings, but partnership LLC, then don't we need an operating generic operating agreement to make it something that can work in real estate? Or
for most LLC holding companies, because when you put a piece of real estate into an LLC structure, it becomes essentially an LLC, holding company, real estate holding company. You generally do want an operating agreement for that LLC, one, to complete the proper setup of the LLC. A limited liability company is technically not complete without an operating agreement, because that tells anybody who gets involved with that LLC how the business is going to be, or the LLC is going to be run, right? So that is an important thing to have. A real estate LLC operating agreement looks a little bit different than, a standard small business operating agreement, but there are some similarities. So that is something where we could probably get a local attorney, David, to prepare that for you and specifically tailor it to a real estate scenario.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yep. Good questions.
Thank you. My others were on accounting type questions. I don't even expect you to try to answer them, but they were interesting though in what we're looking at, because it's could be considered a second home. It all falls down to this, and maybe others might have an answer, is I don't like depreciation. Okay, you take a rental property and you depreciate it and you think things are great and you're taking a loss on your tax return. I think that's the stupidest thing. I'm in the business to make money, not a loss, but we all are landlords and we get excited about taking this loss, but then we go and sell the rental and there's this recapture tax back on all your depreciation, and apparently it's at 25%. That's a horribly high rate with that. And so I kind of need to try to find a way to avoid that, type of scenario, so that 30 years later,
you're not having to pay all that tax back. Yeah.
Yeah, pay all that where the depreciation all comes back. And
yeah,
pay 25%.
Well, and that is going to be a question for an accountant, for a
Right.
CPA, right, on that strategy. So yeah, let's chat. We can even chat through email or set up a separate call and, see if we can't get you connected to the right folks who can help you answer that question.
Great.
Yep. All right. Good questions, David. All right. Marcia, Nan, Marilyn, I'm trying to think what order we came in. Who else has and welcome to Art. Art, happy to see your face here. Pop into the chat if you've got a question or just unmute. Happy New Year.
I have a question, Heather.
Yeah, go for it.
So I am working on a new website and trying to apply the things from the website protection package that I have to that. And I wanted to, if I could show you what she has right now for a cookie disclaimer, because I'm not sure if there's special things I need to put in it. Could I share my screen?
And so really quick, is this somebody else's site? Is this your own site?
It's my own site that I'm having, a Wix site that I'm having someone build for me.
Build. Got it. Okay. Yeah. Let me just do screen. I just wanted to make sure that we're not sharing somebody else's work in a group setting, but glad it's yours.
It's not public yet. If that makes any difference, we're still in the draft stage.
No, the fact that it's yours and you own it, that was my question. So
Okay.
let me just do all participants. Okay. You should be able to share now.
Okay. So let's see, is that right? Yep, there we go. So you can see she said this is the standard cookie disclaimer and we can change it.
Yep.
I looked at yours and one of your spots and it looked like you had a link to your privacy policy. So I don't know if I need to.
Yes, I do highly, highly recommend that whenever you have a cookies pop-up notice that you are linking over to your privacy policy, because that's where the full language, not only regarding cookies, but regarding any of these other privacy practices are going to be living. And so definitely if you have the functionality, include a hyperlink and say, learn more by visiting our privacy policy here or something like that.
Okay, but otherwise the rest of the verbiage, it's just kind of.
Yeah, people are so familiar with these cookie notices now. They understand it's a user experience type of issue that they will have a better experience. So something like that, the important point is that you're notifying them if you use cookies, right? That's the key part, is that we're tracking and logging certain information about your visit that gets stored, on our end. And then in my opinion, also providing that direct link over to the privacy policy so that they can see your privacy practices and everything else that they need to see.
Yeah, so that brings me to my next question. So down here at the bottom, we've got a privacy policy. And then in the terms and conditions page, she actually put the earnings disclaimer at the bottom of that instead of separate. I wanted to know if I need it separate.
You need it separate. The reason why is the FTC wants to see a specific link in your footer menu that is earnings and income disclaimer if you need one. And it's because that is important enough. If you're in the business of talking to anybody about financial scenarios, increasing their income, increasing their earnings, you want your legal notices on separate links, because if somebody's looking for that, they're only looking for that. They don't want to go scrolling all the way through your website terms and conditions, which they don't know is a 10-page document, right? To get to the bottom and find. So I'm very clear that for anybody that I support, you separate those out. They be in different links, really easily identifiable so that you are also considering the user experience and, people can find what they need really easily.
Oh, I forgot. There was one more thing I was going to show you.
Go for it.
Hear that again.
These are great questions. And this is good reminders for anybody else or, your friends in the industries when you see their websites.
Yeah. So this is the bottom of my services page, which it doesn't directly sell, but it's going there. So I have a short version of the earnings.
Yes, good job. Yes, you want that very close to where somebody is clicking through to either sign up for a program or something that they're clear, like this is not a, make $1 million this year business opportunity, get rich quick scheme.
So is this a big enough font? So the regular font is it's pretty close.
I think so. Yeah, it's not overly small where I can't read it. I can easily read that right here. And the fact that earnings disclaimer is in bold pulls your attention there so that you know what it is and you can decide whether or not you want to read it.
Okay.
Yeah, good work.
Okay.
That's a good example.
That was it. Thank you much. Just
Awesome.
wanted to
You're
make sure.
welcome. Congrats. I'm so happy to see you building your own website separate and apart
Yeah.
from Mighty Networks.
Yeah. Well, I had one for the previous iteration of the business, but
Did
yeah,
you?
now we're going to really get this going. So,
Version 2.0. Awesome. We'll
Yeah.
share it when it's all put together.
okay.
Pop
I will.
an email
Thanks.
over to me and share it. Yeah. All right. Who else has a question? How can I support you?
Heather, I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
First of all, Happy New Year, and I love your new website. It's
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Yes.
Thank you.
It takes so much work, doesn't it?
Oh my heavens. And yeah, that one took me a year and a half, right? It was
Yeah.
in my brain. We started it really shortly after the pandemic hit. And then I was like, woo, some things have to be put on hold. That was one of them.
For sure. Yes. So I want to make this quick. The first question has to do with my business.
Okay.
And I'm an interior designer, and up to now I have worked by room.
Mhm.
At the end of 21, I got a big, huge job, which is going to be 4 floors and a renovation.
Congrats.
Thank you. And now I need to write a really detailed scope of work, which I have never written before.
Yes,
Is that a legal document?
it is. So do you have a client services agreement?
You mean like a contract or letter of agreement?
Like a
Yes.
standard, so it's set up for kind of your standard clients, like here's how I work, here's how you pay me, here's what the terms are, here's any additional requirements that you need to know about in order to engage my services, right? So
Yes.
there's a variety of things that should be covered in a good client services agreement.
Yes, I do have that.
Okay. So what I'm gonna pop this into the link. Let's see, limiting scope creep. I have an article that I published on my site a while ago that talks specifically about scope and scope creep,
Awesome.
because for anybody that is doing, especially anything in the creative design services, even consulting sometimes can really suffer from scope creep depending on how something is defined. Let me just grab this article link for you, because there's some things that you can do on your end to really protect yourself and be clear with your client so that everybody knows, everybody's above board. They know exactly what is happening. Let me find the chat really quick. It's just showing me participants. Here's the chat. Okay, so here is the link. It's 7 tips for limiting scope creep. Spend some time going through that, because in any, typically what you would see is, and for consultants, it's called a master services agreement. For somebody like you, you'd have your standard client services agreement, right? That is going to define really the bulk of your legal terms. And I'm happy if you have questions about this specifically to set up a little consult with you if you need it, Nan. But for folks on this call, generally in your primary client services agreement, you're going to go through all of the standard things like, defining the services generally, like what your company does, identifying the parties. You're going to, identify things like term and, limitations of liability. You're going to have disclaimers in place, right? So there's going to be certain risks that about because you're in the design world that you're going to need disclaimers around and limitations of liability around. Over in the scope of work document. And right. So, and a scope of work document is often attached to a master services agreement, in your case, a client services agreement. This is where you identify things that are specific to that client, right? So what is the specific scope of their project? What is the timeline for their project? So often there's cross references between some of the terms in the main body of the agreement and the specifics that live in the scope of work addendum, right? So in that scope of work, and that's where you're going to cover, pricing, payment timelines, and be very clear. Ask yourself at every step, is there a way that this is unclear? So for example, even around payment, you'd be surprised at how often people think payment terms are clear, but it doesn't define how they're going to get paid. So for example, somebody maybe is going to get paid every 2 weeks on a long-term project. Is that direct deposit? Are they mailing you a check and it could show up 7 or 10 days later? Is it going to be processed through, do you have a way of processing your invoices directly, like with your own payment processor? So go through every step, because, once you start asking questions about, is there any part of this that is unclear or that gives somebody some wiggle room not to live up to it, you want to just dig into more details and provide more clarity in that section, right? So especially around the big ones, scope, how do you define scope? And my article will really help you on that. Payment terms, timelines, and then what are the options for people to get out of this? You'd be surprised at how many times I've seen people just include really silly termination clauses. Like there was a client that I consulted with the other day that was looking at a $40,000 design build project for an online business. And the designer, the web, designer had included a termination clause that said either party can terminate this at any time. No, full stop. Like, you are not going to pay somebody $20,000 to get started on a project and give them the right to terminate it at any time.
Okay.
Right? Because the transfer of transferring a project that size midstream to somebody else is going to come with a whole bunch of timeline costs, sunk costs, redesign costs. So, just think through each step of the way. And if you have questions, obviously get in touch. This is what I help people with, and I could, help you draft it. But, some people can do this well on their own just by thinking through each of these steps and just really going for clarity, absolute clarity. So that's my little soapbox spiel, because contracts are really only as good as they are relevant. So what I often see is people are working with totally irrelevant contracts that are not a fit for their business, not a fit for their particular thing, and they're not clear. You just cannot have a good supported client scenario or business exchange if you don't have contracts that are relevant and clear. So there's my 2 big points.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. So it becomes a legal contract because both parties sign it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you execute a contract, you have to have what's called a meeting of the minds. And again, this gets down to clarity. So if somebody is really unclear on a certain point and they sign something thinking that it said X and it really said Y, you may not have had a meeting of the minds. So it's about execution. Was it properly executed? Which means both people, it's generally dated, signed, right, and transferred between the parties so that they both have final signatures, and were all the material terms covered. What's material, right? Material are going to be some of the main points. What's the term? What's the scope of the services? What's the pricing? What are things that if you left out would leave gaping holes in this scenario where there's no way to enforce it because there's no clear understanding? Right. So in different scenarios, different things can be material, but it's just really critical that you go through all of the material terms. And this is really anything that would impact your ability to deliver the work in a way that the client wants it and to get paid for doing that work. So it's generally scope, details within the scope, payment terms, timeline, right? That kind of stuff.
Okay, awesome. And my next, hopefully quick question is, how do we find a housing lawyer in a different state?
Yeah, great question.
Any sort of how
totally. And are you talking about landlord tenant? Are you talking about general real estate?
Landlord tenant.
Landlord tenant.
It's for our daughter. It's not part of my business, but we are trying to find a lawyer in California. And I just don't know if there's any sort of general database of lawyers in different states, or
you can. Let me give you a couple tips. One is I'm happy to send, and I tell people this all the time, if I can't help you, I'm really happy to try to connect you with an attorney who can. So I'm happy to ping my network. I belong to some amazing listservs and ask for a referral directly for you. If you could send me a short email about where she's based, like what city and county she's based in, then I can location specific probably get somebody, or at least somebody inside a law firm who might know somebody who could help her,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So send me a quick email. The other way, just for people on this call, because it's really important how we choose and vet attorneys. And I care a lot about this because it's a pain point for the marketplace. People really struggle to connect with attorneys who are the right fit for them, you know, I love attorneys. Let's be clear that I have so much respect for my colleagues, and the vast majority of attorneys work hard and try really hard to solve very challenging problems for people, right? So there are some attorneys that can give the industry a bad name, but by and large, what I have seen is that they are generous, they work hard. The vast majority are solo practitioners, right? More than 50% work on their own, run a little office like I do, or just trying to help people. They're not in it to become multi-billionaires, right? So there's a really
giant billboard.
Yeah, there's a big disconnect between perception around attorneys and who they often are. But part of the problem is this is furthered by disconnects in the marketplace. This is furthered by the inability of people to get the support that they need. So it's why I care so much about connecting people to the right resources. Generally, you can go to a state bar association website and run practice area specific searches, right? So every state is going to have a state bar. In Washington, it's literally called the Washington State Bar Association, WSBA, right? California is going to have a state bar, right? So if I just Google it, California State Bar Association attorney search, I can probably pop, here we go. I can probably pop the State Bar of California homepage. If you spend some time here, you're probably going to find a search function somewhere that allows you to search for attorneys by practice area. So you could look for either landlord tenant law or housing law or real estate law. Any of those are going to get you close. And then see if you can, you know, look through the list and identify by location where they're based, because it's also going to matter that there's somebody close to her, because, you know, landlord tenant law is not just state level. It's often influenced by also local ordinances, county and city laws as well. So this is where, you know, being jurisdiction specific is really essential. So that's a place you could poke around as well. The other thing I will say generally for people on this call or who watch the recording is, you know, referrals. And I know it's hard when you're talking about across state borders, but let's pretend you're looking for an attorney, you know, in your city or your town or your state. Getting referrals from somebody who's worked with that attorney is a great place to start as far as finding somebody who's trustworthy, who's reputable, and they may not always be the attorney that you end up working with. Be clear that, you know, and I've had to search for attorneys myself, for my family, for friends. Like I've spent I can't even imagine, probably, you know, hundreds of hours through my career that I've spent just helping people connect with the right attorneys. Be clear from the outset that and you can say this, if you're not for me, like if you were hiring for this attorney yourself, who would you hire? Right? Like I'm also interested in referrals if you feel like you are not the perfect fit. And so give them an out, give them a way to provide a referral really easily. And like, I have no problem when somebody says, are you for me? Or is there somebody else who does this better? Right. That's the sign of somebody who is sharp in their search and is really committed to finding the right fit. So just have a lot of clarity, understand that. And I understand also that people often feel intimidated or like they are challenged in knowing who to hire because they don't live in the landscape of law. Generally, regardless of who you hire, I always recommend like you talk with at least 3 or 4 attorneys. Right? Because you're going to get a sense of their personality. You're going to get a sense of how relatable they are. You may have a chance to ask them and figure out little tidbits of expertise to see, like, do they seem like the kind of person who is going to be a champion for what I need? Right? Because, and I'll just give a very quick personal example. Years ago, I had to connect my sister with a family law attorney. Really, really painful experience. She was in a different state, right? She was going through a horrible time in her personal life. 2 little kids were on the line, like all the crazy stuff. And I literally probably spent, 24 hours over 2 days searching for attorneys to help her and making phone calls and, trying to do all the connecting. And we narrowed it down to 3. She hired one, went through a hearing. And I was clear. I showed up to that hearing to observe. I was like, Ashley, this is not your attorney. Like we have to plug in somebody else. And so we said, thank you, appreciate you handling this hearing, fired that individual and went on and found her the next attorney who ended up being amazing. Right. So sometimes that's what it takes. And I just want to put that out there that you have the right to say, this is not working, and find the next attorney who's going to be the right fit. And I think some people end up feeling like, well, I chose this person, I just have to go with them. No, you don't. Right. If you really are feeling like it's not the right fit, thank them, pay them for their services to date, and move on. So that's my other spiel, right? It's just like anything else. You wouldn't continue to see a doctor that you didn't trust or didn't like. You'd probably find a new one, right? Treat this the same way. And just remember that you're in charge of your decision-making and your power. And just because it's an area that you don't know doesn't mean that you need to work with somebody who you feel like is not the right fit.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Nan. And just as a reminder, send me that email and I'm happy to ping my list to see if I can find anybody for you as well.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All righty. Hello to Marilyn. Good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Heather. How are you doing?
I have a lot of hope for 2022. I will say that the last few years have been really good for certain things and really, really hard for other things. So it's like a lot of people, mixed bag, right? But
I know you had a couple of hard months, I know.
Yeah, between personal stuff and regular life and, for any parents of little children right now, it's just crazy town.
I don't know what I would do if I had kids. It would be so hard.
Yeah, well, it's just such a weird thing to, it took years for us to build up supports for our number one who has some disabilities and to get the right therapies in place, get, all of the things, and then lose it all. Like just gone, can't do anything in person. This is a little guy who needs things in person. Over the internet and on, like, you take a typical child that's not a good fit for them, it's like 100 times worse for him, right? So it's it's just been very, very eye-opening, and trying to run a business and be a good mom. And a lot of people can relate, and it's like you learn so much, and you learn about your limits and you learn about your strengths and a lot more about your weaknesses. But the reality is life is good. I'm so clear that I'm in a position that's like better than probably 99% of the world, based on the fact that I have shelter and a warm home and food every day of my life. Right. So I really cannot complain.
I agree. I say the same thing every day. I'm just grateful.
Yeah. So we have a good life and we're healthy. And so, I have high hopes for 2022. And truthfully, when I sat down at the end of 2021, which was a hard year,
I know
there were some really shiny, bright spots. I was like, you know what? Like some of this, like, despite everything that happened, and I'm not always great about slowing down and acknowledging the good stuff and really celebrating. I was like, heck yeah, I feel so proud about how, this has gone overall. And so that's part of, and that reflection, I think reflecting is just so important, especially in hard years and hard times. And so 2022, I'm feeling good about, and we're starting strong, and I'm hopeful. So thank you for asking. Good to see you.
You too. Well, and I apologize for just popping in and out last month. I was on 3 different meetings at the same time, but I had to ask you a question. So I caught you and asked you.
All right, listen, I'm so happy to see anybody popping into these calls. I know firsthand how crazy life can be, and I just feel honored that people are showing up and asking questions and, taking care of their business and spending time with me. So very happy to see you.
I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
One's an easy one. You know what it is.
Yeah.
I'm just checking because but I'm not in a hurry. I'm just checking.
You're actually next, because guess what? You're lucking out because Jay Facette's documents are due like this week. And based on creating his, I'll be able to formulate a template for some of the ones that you're looking for. So
you have my email address.
I have
so-
your email. You are on my list. I have a handful, like probably 5 projects like that carried over from last year, but you guys are top of the list.
Okay, well, my second question also relates to Jay and his projects.
Oh, nice.
So we're getting into crypto.
I've been seeing his posts.
Yeah, so I'm planning to create a coin and some stuff. And so I don't know if I need any different agreements than what I have. I don't see that other coin creators have these kinds of things, but I just thought I would tell you and ask.
Yes, no, it's a really good question. So I actually just had to finish 45 hours of continuing legal education training in December. That was one of the other things that got layered on because it was my reporting year.
Oh, that's what
And
we
of
needed,
course,
yeah.
yeah, of course, I had not squeezed in any continuing legal education in the midst of the pandemic yet. So yeah, December was a crazy month. Also really good though, because first of all, I love continuing education, and there were some areas of law that are rapidly evolving. As you can imagine, crypto and blockchain right now is one of them. So I've actually got this week a 2-hour seminar that I'll be attending and some additional training coming up specifically on blockchain and crypto, because people are moving into that area so quickly, but some of the legal stuff is not actually set up yet, right? So for example, I had a gal that showed up to one of my calls the other day, and she had hired a crypto miner just through a friend, connection from a friend, who had turned like $15,000 investment into $90,000 for her. And, it wasn't a realized investment. I mean, she hadn't liquidated it. She wasn't sitting on $90,000 in cash, but they also had not put in place an agreement that covered the terms for that service, right? So basically, yeah, the crypto miner had held her $90,000 investment hostage until she paid her what she wants. She could basically say, like, you owe me, whatever, and she wasn't going to turn it over. And so, it's unfortunately and I just went through a 2-hour initial training on blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. And the reality is that world, and not our friend Jay, that's not what I'm suggesting, but the world of crypto is still really, really, full of people who are very willing and very fast to take advantage of others. There's been a
Cash
ton.
grabs. Right. Yeah.
There's been a ton of fraud. I mean, just a ton. And so, to anybody on this call or watching the recording, I think it's a really good area to learn about. And I would really caution you to make sure that whoever you're doing business with in the crypto world, that that they're reputable, all of the things. And Marilyn, what I would be happy to do is ping you again after I complete some additional training, because I will be learning more about some of the legal documentation that should be in place to support some of these transactions that, really are evolving and that people need to have access to. But attorneys everywhere are trying to basically catch up and scramble to understand this better, especially in the world of intellectual property, because a ton of IP rights are actually transferring to blockchain technology because they're open source, right? So it's a fascinating thing, but really good question.
So what I've learned about the legal side of this so far is that, there's a big difference between securities and commodities, and the SEC hasn't figured out how they want to define that. So I'm just trying to be conservative in what I create. Yeah. The other thing I've learned is that Wyoming seems to have codified some of I think they've got 12 different laws that explain what like a DAO is, an LLC in their terms. And they've started to create a legal structure within, their laws in Wyoming for crypto stuff.
Oh, interesting.
That's what I know.
Well, and the thing with crypto is what's happening right now is the SEC is playing a lot of catch up for big players that got into the crypto game and did any kind of, I think they're called ICOs, right? Initial coin offerings. That turns out most of those are governed by our securities laws. And so there are a whole slew of enforcement actions now proceeding kind of through the normal course of things, which takes some time, against some of the big initial ICO companies, because they didn't have proper paperwork. They didn't make all the disclosures that you're required to make. It's certain, and the catch up now is very expensive. A lot of these companies, unfortunately, will go bankrupt because they simply will not be able to comply with the law. It's so expensive. And so it is definitely a landscape to watch. I think that in the coming years, the legalities will become more solidified and get more clear. It's really clear that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is not going anywhere, right? There's going to be a space for it. But when it comes to the regulatory landscape, that's kind of an evolving space right now. And, you know, the other thing is that, so like Coinbase, which I think is an exchange, right? It's a place where people can show up, purchase crypto, like services like that are subject to certain regulations, where if you purchase Bitcoin directly in the marketplace, that's not covered by securities and exchange laws, right? That was never, like, it wasn't designed like an ICO or like one of these exchanges that got set up after the fact that provide an alternate route for people to get into that, you know, that landscape. So there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of pieces that are regulated, some that are still not. And so it's, you know, and the nature of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies generally are that they are challenging to regulate, right? So like Turkey, for example, is one of the countries right now trying to tell their people, no, you cannot use cryptocurrency. You cannot, because it's scary to some countries that have less stable financial systems. Right here in the States, we haven't yet suffered major financial losses related to our financial systems that are backed by our government. Other countries have. Right. And so, for example, in South America, it's much more common right now that people are actually using Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to buy and sell real estate because that's safer. They don't have certain of the stop gaps that we have here, like a escrow officer that actually holds all the money in escrow, holds all the documentation until both parties fulfill their parts of the agreement. Right. So it's being used also in other countries in really interesting ways. Turkey's trying to prevent its people, period, from using blockchain technology and cryptocurrency because they're, you know, certain countries are just more concerned about what that will do, what that means when people opt out of current financial systems, right? But certain people, especially outside of the US, actually see it as a more stable system than their own financial system within their country. So, but, you know, the nature for anybody who has studied Bitcoin and how it was developed, was designed that there's no one figurehead that you can go after, right? So from a regulatory standpoint, who do you take down? It's a system essentially owned by the people. It's really, really hard to enforce that or to get people in trouble for that when, you know, people around the world are now using this as a marketplace. So anyways, it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
So if you could point me towards anything that would tell me how to make sure what I'm creating is not a security, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Yes, I will. And let me go back and look at my notes from that first training and I'll send you a little email.
Thank you.
Yes. Good to see.
Let me know how I can support you.
Oh, thank you. Yes. No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Marilyn. Welcome to Carrie and Art. I see
Heather.
that you have a question. Good to see you. Art, what's your question? Because I know you've had your hand up for a bit.
Yeah. So one of the programs that I do, it's called Offering Your Gifts to the to the World, and it clears unconscious and energetic blocks. It's aimed for people in business or careers.
Yep.
I don't make any financial claims, but should I still have a disclaimer? And if in the future I'm using testimonials of people talking about what happened, then
Yeah, certainly if you have testimonials that are, anything like, oh my gosh, I doubled my business after working with Art, or I went from whatever, 60,000 a year to 250, like anytime people are talking about financial stuff in relation to your services, it's a really good idea, just so that you address any misperception right before it starts. With your program, so what is it called again?
it's called offering your gifts to the world.
Yeah, and you said that there's no marketing language or anything that talks about money or finances. How do you reference that program? Like if you were to sum it up in a couple sentences, how do you describe that program?
Well, I describe it as clearing unconscious spiritual and energetic blocks to being more successful.
Yeah.
So,
on that one, it's a little bit of a gray area. I'm very clear that if anybody is talking about money, earnings, finances, you need it. In that instance, and probably in your documentation, you already have some of this. The first flag that gets raised for me for anybody doing, kind of that, some people would call it like spiritual, energetic, but quasi-physical work as well. It would be, making sure that you have a disclaimer about not being a medical professional, right? Not diagnosing. And I think that stuff is already included, I'm sure, in the documentation you have. Yeah. If you need it reviewed or we need to, improve it or make it very specific in any way, you're welcome to reach out to me. But
can I just ask, does that include, because usually I put psychological too, because that's mentioned in there, right? Yeah,
totally. Yeah, exactly. So, what people need to be aware of is that if they do have any questions about, mental or physical health issues, they need to reach out to, licensed professionals and their doctors and all of that stuff. And, that's one thing that it just does not hurt to have that language anywhere you're showing up and doing that work so that people are really clear. And for the most part, they are. It's just that every once in a while, just going to say it, you get somebody inside your program or course who, just has a misunderstanding about what they're there for, or what you're there to do. And sometimes these people are just a little imbalanced. Sometimes, something else is going on. We just have to be as clear as possible so that we, take care of those folks on the fringe as well.
And links for the disclaimer would need to be on any sales page. They need to be in the program itself.
Helpful. A lot of people inside of programs, you might even see, like, depending on how the program is set up, it could be a video slide. It could be literally just a post somewhere inside, like a teachable account. If you have chapters, like one that says, hey, and you get on video and you talk through, here's what this is, here's what it's not. And you have the documentation that has your disclaimer below that, right? So there's no right or wrong way to do it. The key is, did you achieve constructive notice, right? So from a legal perspective, did people get exposure to that disclaimer and that information before they started, so that they didn't have any false sense of what was happening? And that can happen in a variety of ways. Yeah, great question. An important reminder around disclaimers so that we help people be clear about what we're doing or what we're not doing.
And another question, and it's probably covered in the material, but I don't think on my website I have anything about cookies. And I guess every website needs that if you're collecting.
If you're collecting information, I highly recommend it. That would have been covered, and I'm happy to ping you inside the group, Art, but also I can just send you a follow-up email.
Okay.
There are some free cookie notice pop-up tools you can use, and then hopefully they have the functionality where you can link, like I said, over to your privacy policy.
Yeah.
But yeah, just really helpful if you've got a website that's collecting all of that kind of back-end information, that we let people know about it.
And yeah, I guess so collecting. So I'm like using Infusionsoft. So I'm collecting.
Using Infusionsoft, but you also, I suspect, do you have Google Analytics turned on?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
There's a ton, like literally,
Yeah.
there's so much information collected by Google Analytics. It would just blow people's mind if you could like physically see the data that they have.
Right. Fingerprints, everything.
They can track you down to a physical residence without knowing your physical residence, right? So it literally is personal identifying information. And so that's why, unless somebody has built their own business and set up analytics themselves and they understand the ins and outs of data collection, people generally are understanding that a lot of data gets collected about them online, but a lot of people still think it's data that, they're making available. Like they type in their email address, they're clear that
Right.
somebody's like they may not know that their device number is being tracked and whether they're with Verizon or AT&T and what geolocation they're sending this message from. Like there's so much that gets tracked that literally like they could trace you down to a physical household without having your address. So it's just a lot. And that is why we need to disclose these things in our privacy policies and have our cookies consent notices up and stuff, is that it's really our job to show our website visitors and our business clients that we care about their data, but also that we're collecting a lot of data.
Right.
Just the truth of it.
And I think this is a quick question. So I've just recently become an LLC. Now I have my old business bank account. Do I need to start a brand new bank account, or can I convert the old one? Or
this is a great question. Most likely you'll be required to set up a new one. The reason being is that for business banking purposes, generally when you set it up, you're required to have what's called an EIN if you're a business, right? An employer identification number. If you don't have that as a sole proprietor, they base it on your personal tax ID, right? So you probably gave your social security number at the point of setting up that initial bank account.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, for tracking purposes and for IRS purposes, generally when you set up a new business, because technically this is a separate business, it's now contained under a business entity, right? You're gonna first of all apply for, if you haven't already, and get a new EIN, and then you're gonna use that certificate of organization from the state along with that EIN to set up your new banking. And so you could always check to see whether the bank has some mechanism, like you could call your bank or go in for a visit and see whether they have some mechanism for updating the documentation and changing over that account automatically. Most likely from a paperwork perspective, the answer is going to be no, and you're just going to have to set up a new set of bank accounts. But it's worth checking. Maybe some banks have dealt with this enough that they have a way that they can make that happen for you. I know it's a pain.
Create confusion.
It could create confusion and trying to distinguish between where your last business stopped and where your new business started from from the standpoint of tracking individual transactions, so the likely answer is that you'll set up a new set of business bank accounts.
And for people in my year-long program, I'm thinking I need to have them sign new agreements, new business, right? Because their agreements are with the old business.
That's right. And so this is a great point for anybody on the call or watching the recording, is that when you've done like Art has, which has gone to the effort of actually creating a business structure, one of the biggest, easiest, simplest mistakes to make is somebody sends you over a contract or you create a quick one and you sign in your individual name, not on behalf of your new business entity. That is problematic because it voids, for all intents and purposes, it voids the legal protection that your business entity now provides you. When you sign in your individual name, you're individually responsible for what happens or doesn't happen in fulfillment of that contract, and you're individually liable. The whole purpose of setting up an LLC or a C corporation or some other business entity is that the liability for any scenarios that you are operating within, through your business are protected by that business structure. So every contract that you sign, once you have a business entity in place, unless it literally is a personal contract, like, you're taking out a personal loan or something. Generally, you are going to identify. So Art, what is the name of your new business, your LLC?
So it's Energetic NLP LLC.
Yeah. So every contract should identify Energetic NLP LLC as the party signing the contract. And then you're going to have a byline that says by Art Geiser with your title, right? And you can call yourself whatever you want, whether it's managing member, sole member, president, it's your choice. But technically an owner of an LLC is a member. And so, but you identify yourself as an individual with a title on behalf of that business, not just you as an individual.
So it has to say the contract is with Energetic NLP LLC. And the signature is by Art Geiser as the Grand Poobah.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna how to sign. I'm gonna pop another article.
Ooh,
Because this is a big no-no, and a lot of people get this wrong. They're cruising along, they don't think of it, and they just do something simple that ends up voiding all of that legal protection. So here is a link in the chat for somebody, and I posted one earlier, which I'll repost in case anybody is also concerned about scope creep. But those are a couple of articles that we've covered on this call. That how to sign on behalf of a corporation or LLC is a good one, because it'll actually show you, Art, what your signature line should look like.
It's funny because I just did a little contract and they had Energetic NLP, and I sent it back and went, well, you need to put Energetic NLP LLC.
That's true.
I'm not sure if I signed it correct.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure that was true, but I thought, I think I better have the right name.
No, it is true. That is another thing that happens often, is that by law, when you have an LLC, you're actually required to have LLC on the end of your business title, right? So for example, in Washington, I have a PLLC. My legal practice is a professional limited liability company. I cannot put Pierce Law anywhere and not also include the PLLC. So part of it is that there are often legal requirements that actually try to help ensure that people are properly identifying their business when they're in the marketplace. And it's really important that we do that properly when we sign contracts as well.
And this might be outside of your expertise. When you're an LLC, you can either be taxed as an S Corp or as a sole proprietor.
Or a C Corp. So yeah.
C Corp. And somebody told me that so there's 3 choices, right?
Yeah, there may be more. Generally, the standard, because it's called actually tax election status. So a quick overview for people here who are either already have an LLC or interested in the LLC model. It was a legal model that developed in the 70s as a way to protect 2 partners going into business, protecting each other against liability that the other person brought into the business, right? So what it did is it limited the liability in any scenario in that business to their individual contributions in the business. So let's say 2 people get together, they each put $5,000 into this business to start it. And then one of them goes and signs, $100,000 loan for the business. And there's no personal collateral, right? The business is on the hook for that, but the liability for each individual LLC member is actually limited to what they have put into the LLC, assuming there's no fraud going on in regards to that loan, right? So the way the LLC model evolved was actually to protect people from each other, from other business partners. And what happened over time is it became the most popular model for sole individual member LLCs, for just a sole business owner, like sole proprietor, because it still offers that limited liability protection. And it is limited because there are certain things that you can't do in business, and just have, carte blanche by, doing it within an LLC. But you are limited to your investment in your business, that the liability that you create in your business no longer carries over into your personal life and puts your home at risk, your personal business bank accounts at risk, your spouse's income at risk, right? So that's the benefit of an LLC. But you need to identify it properly. You need to sign contracts properly. You still have to comply with the rules and really treat your business like a business in order to achieve that liability protection.
But do the choices offer different liability protection?
No. So this is a good question.
Somebody told me they did, and I'm confused.
So Yeah, so there is a lot of misconception. The LLC corporate, that as an entity, right, as a business structure, is where you are offered the legal protection. And that's because you went to your state, you formed the LLC entity, you filed the paperwork, right? If you do it the right way, you're also putting your operating agreement in place. A lot of people skip this. They do the initial filing, like the articles of organization with the state. They don't carry through and actually do the multiple other steps that it takes to complete a business setup. So you need an operating agreement, because this, even though you're not required to file it publicly, if you're to ever get sued, if you are to get in an altercation or be audited by the IRS, they want to know that you're running your business like a business, and your operating agreement is the document that says, here's how we run the business, right? Literally is the operating agreement. So you do need to have that in place, physical copy, signed, kept in your files, as a way to show that you are treating your business like a business. You've got a document that says, here's how we're managing the business. And, you know, there can be other things that show up within the operating agreement that provide you some protection from creditors, from certain things happening. But separately, there is what's called tax election status. And in an LLC model, the draw to this model is, first of all, it's flexible from a management perspective, but it is also flexible from a tax perspective. And if you don't make any tax elections, then you have what's called flow through taxation, right? You get taxed, your income flows through that LLC and gets accounted for on your individual 1040, right? Your schedule 1040C. Because you're reporting all of the income that was created within your LLC that flowed through to you individually. Now, if you don't want that, there's a point generally related to earnings where that no longer makes sense because of what happens from a tax perspective. So if people are trying to optimize their tax advantages, right, at some point, and you'll hear people say different things, whether it's 60,000, 80,000, 100,000, whatever, there's going to be a point where making an S Corp election from a tax perspective may make sense. If you're going to make $100,000 through your LLC, the advantage of an S Corp election is that you get to, let's just use round numbers, because from the IRS perspective, you have to pay yourself what's called a reasonable salary. So if you're making $100,000 through your LLC in a given year, maybe you pay 50,000 of that to yourself through a salary. This means you're going to pay both the employee side taxes and the employer side taxes, right? So FICA, Medicare, FUTA, which is a new tax, but basically it ends up being about, I think, 13.2% or something, right? So you pay a percentage of tax based on the fact that, you know, you're the owner of the LLC, you pay the employer side, federal, Medicare, and, you know, additional taxes. And then on the employee side, you have to, I think it's like 6.5% or something gets taken out of your paycheck. But what happens to the additional 50,000 is that you can pay these out in a different manner, where they're only going to be subject to like the 6.5% taxes, because they can be paid out as distributions, right? And so what happens is you have a tax savings of, you know, and I don't know the exact math, but you have a tax savings basically saving you from that double taxation. So at a certain amount, many accountants will often say, okay, now it makes sense. It's time to make an S Corp election, tax election, because you will actually, you know, it's money back in your pocket from a tax savings perspective. Some LLCs, so I've worked with people that have a day job. They actually don't need the money that they're making through this secondary LLC. In that instance, you might make a C Corp election, because with an LLC, all of the income has to be reported in that same calendar year, right? You can't hold it in your business and not pay it out. You get taxed on all of it within the calendar year that you made it. So with a C Corp though, let's say you have a primary day job over here. You don't need to pull this money out of your side business. You make a C Corp election, you can hold money in that company and not pay it out the same calendar year. So if you're investing back in your business, if you want to hold money, let's say you made quite a bit in 2021 or 2022, and you don't want to report certain of those earnings until the following year, you can hold it inside of your C Corp and not have a tax obligation in this year. So there's certain advantages that, depending on your financial goals, depending on your income, depending on whether you're building a business and you want to optimize for tax strategy versus, let's say, earnings. If you're creating a business that you want to franchise and sell, you want to create a business model that's sellable, right? You're going to optimize that business for earnings. You're not optimizing for tax strategy. You're going to want every amount of earnings on the book so that you can show it's a profitable business, right? So whether you make certain tax election status changes really has to do with your personal scenario, what your financial goals are, right, et cetera. There's a lot that goes into that decision. But hopefully that helps, because people often get confused because they think S Corp is actually a legal entity. S Corp is not a legal entity. It is a tax election status that you can apply to an entity. The S Corp is the mixed status. You're kind of treated like an LLC. You're kind of treated like a C Corp. It's a little bit in the middle.
But in terms of liability, it's only in terms of taxes.
It's only in terms of taxes. Liability, you're protected. You have that liability protection if you follow all the rules. What does that mean? That's corporate governance, right? And let me just pop over. There's one more article because I want to be respectful of people's time. I know we've covered a lot today. There's an article that I wrote at the end of last year. Let me just go to it. It's on my blog. But there's a section within it, end of year planning tips for small businesses and entrepreneurs. The part that I want you guys all to be cognizant of is a piece that most small businesses get wrong. There are very, very few people that do this right. So end of year planning tips, if you pull up that article and go to section 4, catch up corporate books, right? You're going to have a list there of what it takes to properly maintain your corporate records. And let's be clear that an LLC is less stringent than a C Corp, but you still have requirements for corporate books, right? So this is, just make sure that you've reviewed that list. If you have any questions, get in touch, or there are actually businesses out there. And in fact, I came across one the other day that I hadn't seen before that will do your catch-up minutes for you. Right. So corporate governance means that you're treating your business like a business. And when you do certain things in your business, you document it. The problem with LLCs is that often they're run by an individual. It's not like you're having, business meetings with your business partners in most circumstances. And so that far less gets documented because people just don't often understand that there's a requirement to do that. And of course, they're not like sitting there chatting with other people and needing to actually document meeting minutes or discussions or final decisions. Turns out you still need to document those things, even if you're a sole member LLC. You just are going to do it in a slightly different way, right? It's a little bit less formal. You have a bit more flexibility. Still needs to be done. So make sure you look at point number 4 on that list. And to the extent you can, catch up your corporate books from last year. Go through and look at what major decisions did you make? When did you make them? Sit down and create meeting minutes and documentation that correlates to proper timelines, because that way, first of all, you're not playing catch up later. If you do get audited, you're not having to create all of this from scratch. Some accountants will help with this as well because they know which financial decisions are really critical to document. But start with that article and hopefully it'll give you a little guidance on that.
Well, that was all fantastic. And just for everybody, I could kick myself across the room for never having done an LLC. It took half an hour. It was so easy. It's just, so I want to encourage everybody else. I can't believe I never did it. It was like, oh.
Well, congrats. It's a big step though. And let's talk about why that happens. People, first of all, who loves being involved with any governmental process, right? Pretty much none of us. So there is a perception that it's, often more challenging than it is. But my one question for you is, how do you feel now that you have it set up? Right? Like that's exactly it. Like, yes, like it is. I had another client that even, and it wasn't setting up an LLC, but it was something else that, finally he tackled this one legal thing in his business that he knew he needed to tackle. And he said to me, it feels like I took off a 50-pound backpack I didn't know I was carrying around. That's often how it feels for people when they finally address this piece, because it's like hangs out back there. I had another gal jump onto a call mid-year through last year on one of these calls. She was like, I don't have any questions. I just popped in because I set up my LLC. Like she was so excited. She just wanted to celebrate with somebody. And it is a big deal. The other thing that actually setting up an LLC or any other proper business entity does, in my opinion, and I've seen it hundreds of times, changes the way people feel about their business, changes the way they show up to their business. It literally, it just is a mindset change and always for the better, always for the better. So congrats, Art. I'm totally celebrating with you.
Thank you. Yeah. And all of that is absolutely true. And, particularly if you have a home or anything.
Yes.
It just dawned on me like, oh my God, I'm
right. Well,
risking everything,
Yes. I had a client who had a baby and the baby was a few years old and, he knew, and he had a 700 at that point, like a $700,000 or $800,000 a year business, also based in California. Mm-hmm. And he just, he was like, I've known that I've needed to handle this. And we sat down and we did a whole chunk of work together. Did not take long, was not that expensive. And he was like, holy cow, I can't believe I put this off. Just the peace of mind of knowing, and especially if you're somebody that has any personal assets, it's a difference between literally having all of your assets available to the world if something goes wrong versus containing that risk inside of your business. It's a big difference. So I think Carrie may have had a question. I want to be respectful of the fact that she's still on the call. Hi, Carrie. I know we could go all day. I just love all of these topics, but tell me how I can help you today.
So first of all, Art, your questions about LLC were super helpful because I also, after being in business for 10 years, just created an LLC this month. So yay.
Congrats.
However, I have a thank you. I have a question about payment. My income can vary drastically from month to month. How, and I understand I need to pay myself a salary, just a transfer, I'm assuming from my new bank account, which I just realized I need to set up to myself, to my personal bank account. How do I do that regularly if my salary goes up and down quite a bit, or my income goes up and down quite a bit?
This is a great question. So there are a couple of ways you can handle this. And Carrie, have you made an S Corp election? Is that why you're saying you need to pay yourself a salary?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I just thought that was what I had to do to kind of keep that separation of business and personal. Okay.
No. So let's talk about this. This is an important question.
Okay.
You have to pay yourself a salary if you have made that S Corp election. Right? That puts you in a different category. If you're an LLC, you can make at any time what's called an owner's draw.
Okay.
So, and
Great.
and how many of us can relate to money going like this, right? Month to month. Yeah, it's really hard to plan for a set salary, a set draw. So a couple things I want to say about this. One, you can do an owner's draw anytime. Right. And I would say as much as possible, and if you haven't already, read the book, Pay Yourself First. You want to get into the mindset of thinking that you have to pay a salary to yourself, because you start to look at that as a business expense that you're going to meet along with all of your other business expenses. Right. And it will make you more successful in your financial planning. So I would put on the books like, okay, my goal is to pay myself, whatever it is, $6,000 a month, right? What do you need to cover your bills and give you some money that you can put in personal savings, right? So set that as a goal and then add your other, operating expenses on top of that. So, but the truth is, if you're a single member LLC and you've not made an S Corp election, you're not required to pay yourself a salary. So you can, you can build up your bank account for a little bit, make sure that you have enough to cover your bills, and then take an owner's draw once you're ready. if at some point, let's pretend that you do this for a year or two and you're like, okay, I'm starting to see a rhythm. I'm starting to see about how much I can pay myself. This seems to be pretty consistent, right? And you're making enough that it makes sense to do an S Corp election. With an S Corp, because some people still face the same struggle. Well, I'm still a sole member LLC. I still don't have super consistent earnings. It still feels really uncomfortable to just put myself on a monthly salary because I'm not sure that I can make that every month, depending on what other expenses I have. You can do what's called a catch-up payment at the end of the year, because the key, what the IRS wants to see from you is that you, first of all, paid some amount in salary and that you paid all of these taxes that we're talking about, FICA, FUTA, some of the taxes that are required when employers pay a salary to somebody, right? Both the employer side taxes as well as the employee side taxes. So you can watch that. And for the first year or two after becoming an S Corp, you can actually continue to do draws, but get a good accountant that can help you do what's called an end of year catch-up payment, where you pay a certain amount in salary, but you also calculate in a bunch of your federal income tax into that payment through withholding. So for example, I just went through this in my business in December. I paid $10,000 to myself in salary, but I had like $85,000 or $9,000 in withholding, which basically means I didn't get paid at all. Right. But that was a tax payment so that it's on the books. It's on the books for 2021. It's a catch-up payment that also catches you up on some of your tax liability, tax obligations. But it's not a challenging thing to do if you have the right accountant who can help you do that. And that way you're not stressing out every month trying to figure out like, how much do I pay myself in salary and paying, because payroll services are going to charge you, it's not a lot, 35 or 40 bucks a month for the service. And then generally around $6 per check issued through their service, right? So let's just call it $50 a month generally if you are a single owner LLC. You can save yourself $600 a year by just doing that catch-up payment, right? And doing it in December at the end of that year, especially if you're in some of the early years of trying to determine what is a fair salary, how consistently can I create income, all of these kinds of questions.
So I'm a little confused at the end of that. You said if I'm an S Corp, then I can do the catch-up payment, but if I'm just an LLC, and then I cannot, right? Is that what you're saying?
If you're just an LLC, it means you have passed through taxation. You're going to be taxed at the individual level on your 1040C. So you still have a tax obligation. It's helpful to have an accountant on your team that can help you understand that as you go along so that you're not surprised by an obligation at the end of your year. But you're not going to have the same obligation in regards to salary and, and tracking, because, salary, you have payroll expenses, you're paying federal taxes, usually at the same time that you're making that salary payment. You're then going to have that, that payment transferred into your personal bank account. And part of that's automatically going to be removed through withholding, right? It's just a different setup. It's a different way of paying yourself, just a little bit more complicated.
And I only need to have somebody do my books and pay for those transfers if I'm an S Corp. If I'm just an LLC, then I don't need to do that.
You don't need to do that. No.
Okay, thank goodness.
Yes. Yeah. It's, it's not that big of a deal if you have the right help when you're ready to make that leap. Okay. But just, don't be overly afraid of it. Even if you go most of the year and you're like, man, I still haven't paid myself a salary, you can still kind of, fix that scenario before the end of the year. So just make sure you get connected with the right accountant that can help you, because there is a tax form that has to be filed, just a few extra steps, but easy to actually meet that obligation.
Okay, great. I'm bringing on an accountant, so that should help.
Good.
This is my first time on one of your calls. I don't know how long you normally go. Is this supposed to end at like noon or 12:30?
It normally goes like 11 to noon. Okay. I have kids home today because of, the pandemic. And yeah, so fun. So I don't have, normally I'm running out the door to actually pick them up for lunches so that they're not unmasking around other kiddos. But today we went a little bit longer just to make sure we got to people and say Happy New Year and try to answer as many questions as possible.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm gonna hold my other questions till we talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, no
So,
worries. Totally. Great to see
Yeah.
you on here. You're welcome to email me. You're also welcome, you know, because I do these monthly, like David did. If you have a question in advance and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make it, I really want this question answered, you can email me and I will try to handle that question anyways, and then have a
Okay.
recording of it.
great
Yeah.
to know. All
Yeah,
right, thank you
good.
so much. This was really great.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Carrie. Great questions.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Anybody else before we sign off? Any other questions that we can handle? And you're welcome, Nan. All right, you good? Congrats. So happy for you. Starting 2022 strong. Marcia, you good? Awesome. All right. Well, I appreciate you all. Glenn, I don't know if you had a question, if you're just showing up to benefit from all of these other amazing questions, but great to have you today. David, good to see you as well. And we will be in touch very soon. Okay. Happy New Year, folks. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I'm going to sign off.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.